Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here for our latest special Trump v. Biden down ballot drama. I don't know about you, but I realized the other day that I don't think I have a full, complete picture of this election and therefore what's at stake with it at the end of the day. Because there's obviously a ton of talk about the top of the ticket, right? Trump v. Biden. And there should be a lot of attention paid to that. It's a big deal. But there's also vitally important Senate races that I have not heard talked about. Now, maybe that's because I'm here in California and there is no Senate race, or like Democrats are going to win everything in California, right? But there's big Senate races, big congressional races, and then, of course, local races too. And you can make an argument, I would make the argument that the local races are of the utmost importance, maybe more important than the federal ones even. Local school board races, things like that. But the entire ballot matters, as most of the country's attention is on just the very top. But, I mean, Trump could win the White House again, but the Republicans lose the Senate. Now we're in for at least 2 more years of nothing. Just nothing changing for the better, nothing really happening at all legislatively, certainly. Or Trump loses the White House. Can Republicans at least keep the Senate to limit the damage from a Biden-Kamala White House? Now, let me say this up front. Checks and balances. This is all part of the system. You hear a lot of people on the left, in particular, complain about, well, the root of it is they're complaining that we don't have a king, who can just do whatever he wants when he's the president. But the fact that we have different parties who can hold different branches of government, that's a good thing. That's not a bug of the system. That's a feature of it. That's how it was designed. That's how our Constitution's written, and that's a good thing. So if it ends up being split, right? Republicans have the presidency and Democrats have the Congress, or whatever, however it goes. That's not the worst thing. Clearly, I'd prefer conservatives to hold it all, or at least have be one speed bump in our nation's decline. And heaven forbid, we try and actually turn this country around and get back on the proper path. So coming up, we're going to talk about these down ballot races. We're also going to talk about what a Democratic president and Congress could do, particularly with the nuclear option, ending the filibuster. I hear a lot of people talk about the filibuster. I don't even really know what it is. I kind of know what it is. I have this idea, you just talk, you just go on and on and on, talk forever, and you can't vote on something. But I have this theory that so many things in the media, people in the media, they just talk about it and they don't explain it because they don't want to be exposed as not really knowing what it is either. So I'm not afraid to come across looking stupid. So we're going to talk to a guest coming up, and my first question is going to be, what's the filibuster? What is it exactly? What is it? When did it start? Who wants to get rid of it? Why do they want to get rid of it? What's going on here exactly? So we're going to do that with Michael Anton coming up in a little bit. Let me make one final point before we get going. Some big picture perspective, as not only the country is so focused on the top of the ticket, but the country is just so focused on the election in general. Politics, our federal government, is just one aspect of our country, and therefore just one aspect of our lives. It's not everything. I'll never forget, it was, I forget who it was, Rick Perry. He was running for president in 2008, I don't know. And he was giving some speech here in San Diego, and I'm sure he said this everywhere, but it's something like, I want to be president, and I want to make the federal government so inconsequential to your life that you don't even think about it. You don't think about me, you don't think about the federal government, you never even think or talk about Washington, D.C. We just have no role in your life, as little role as possible. We certainly I wish we'd get back to that with the limited government, but even so, politics and the federal government is one aspect of our country. It's not everything. When the Marxists in the 60s talked about the long march through the institutions, they weren't just talking about the federal government. All right? The Marxists actually, they knew they couldn't take over our federal government. And they knew that even if they did take over the presidency, that there'd be checks and balances, and the system that our founders designed would stop them from doing too much all at once. So the Marxists came up with a different strategy. And the strategy was to march through all the institutions. Louis Althusser was the guy who specifically talked about this, and then Gramsci too. But he talked about the different cultural institutions, and he described the church, our education system. So as I'm listing these, let me know if you think they've taken these institutions over. The church, the education system, goodness, the family, the legal system, the unions, the media, arts, like singing, like music and stuff, and even sports. He listed sports as one of the things. I think we see all that. I mean, look how woke even our sports leagues are today. The left controls every single cultural institution that exists. I mean, that's our goal here at The First, is to take back some of the media sphere that's completely controlled by the left. And don't think for a second that Fox is like your savior on the right. They're not. They won't be for long, at least. Look how woke every corporation has become. The CEO of Coinbase, which is like this cryptocurrency company, the CEO is under fire because he wrote this blog post about how they're a mission-focused company, meaning we're not going to get involved in political issues. Like, we come together for a specific mission, no matter what our skin color is or whatever. And he's getting attacked to that for not being woke enough because he dare judge someone by the content of their character and not simply by the color of their skin. I say that because to the left, everything must be political. Every institution must be taken over. And I think they've been successful. So no matter what happens in this election, we have to keep our eye on the big picture. We have to keep our eye on the other aspects of our culture that matter as well and preserve this American way of life that we're losing in all of its forms. And unlike the left, we should never put all of our hope in the federal government or in the office of the president or in the United States Senate. They are not our salvation. And their control over our culture is pretty negligible. Like, what can the federal government do to stop Hollywood from being so far left, for instance? We need to keep fighting the culture war, one person at a time. So that's there. But winning the federal government is something we need to do too. And at least it's a speed bump on the left's march through everything else. And remember how awesome it felt in 2016 when Trump won and the cable news hosts were all crying as the states started pouring in? Oh, it's a beautiful thing. And I can't fathom their reaction if Trump wins again or if the Republicans keep the Senate, maybe win back the House. Is that even a possibility? Can that even happen? Let's talk about that next. The X's and O's of this election, the close states. Can Republicans keep the Senate? Can they maybe win the House? We'll do that next. Trump v. Biden, down ballot drama. First, before we do that, got to talk about gold, right? You know, no matter what happens, things are going to be crazy. Everyone, like, the stock market's going to go crazy, but just, it's going to be an awful time to be in America. For me, it's that type of uncertainty and unrest that makes gold massively appealing. That's why I have some. This is why the chief investment officer at UBS Global Wealth Management said gold's going to hit $2,000 by the end of the year. It's at $1,800 right now. The head of real asset strategy at Wells Fargo said to buy gold, he thinks it's going to be $2,300. Bank of America said it may hit $3,000 by the end of the year. And everyone's seeing the same thing we're seeing. I mean, these aren't, like, you have to be a genius to see what's coming here. You're smart enough to get this. On top of that, like, what do you think a Biden-Harris ticket's going to do for the dollar? What do you think a $2.4 trillion stimulus package on top of everything else that we've already done now is going to do for the dollar? It's not going to go well. Own gold, like literally have it in your possession, in your hand. For nothing else, it's good for when things hit the fan. So who do you get it from? Patriot Gold Group, there's no question. America's highest rated precious investment firm by everyone, by Consumer Affairs, Retirement Living, Better Business Bureau. Consumer Affairs gives it the 5 stars, 4 years running. I mean, there's no one better. They're gonna, I promise you, they're gonna treat you so well. They're gonna figure out what's best for you and your family. But let's get some gold. Free Investor's Guide. To give them a call. Any questions you have, 1-800-798-4260. Any questions at all about gold. And also a no fee for life IRA program as well. 1-800-798-4260. It's Patriot Gold Group. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's get right to it on our special down ballot drama. I want to go to Chris Wilson. He is the president of WPA Intelligence, the Republican polling and data science firm, to give us the X's and O's of what to look for in these Senate races. Chris, how are you, brother?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you. So let's just roll through it. What are some of the big states here that we need to be looking? Well, let me ask you a big question, big picture. Do you think the Republicans can hold the Senate?
I do, but it's only because the election is being held in a month. And if the election were held today, it would be a challenging situation. I'll remind you that 4 years ago, we were talking about the Access Hollywood tapes, and it was nobody gave Donald Trump a chance to win, and people thought that Ron Johnson was going to lose, and that Republicans were going to lose Ohio and a lot of other states, and it ended up coming through. So a lot can happen in a month, and that's why you have campaigns, and you don't just call it off on October 8th. It's the fact that we can move forward and get our way through and still run through the tape, I think, is what will save Republicans in a lot of these states. And you said, let's get to it. I mean, I'll start with a great example, Colorado, where you've got Cory Gardner, who's the incumbent senator, who's running against the governor who was running for president and then dropped down to run for governor, John Hickenlooper. On one side, Hickenlooper is raising a lot of money. And that's the one similarity that all the Democratic campaigns have this year. They are very well funded. Having said that, John Hickenlooper is kind of like a mini Joe Biden in that he's a gaffe machine and he's got a lot of ethical issues. And so because of that, I think it really gets down to who works the hardest. And I'll tell you, Cory Gardner is indefatigable. He is the kind of guy that there are 5 undecided voters in the state, and they're at all the different corners and maybe in the middle. He's going to drive and talk to them all. I mean, he's really that level of campaigner, and that's why he was able to win it 6 years ago, and I think he'll be okay on Election Day. I'll go from there to North Carolina. It's been in the news a lot. You have the incumbent Tom Tillis, who was down for most of the entire cycle. Frankly, if we'd had this conversation a week ago, I would have told you that Tillis was on the ropes. But over the course of the last week, Cal Cunningham, the Democratic nominee, who was interesting because Chuck Schumer came in and spent millions of dollars to help Cunningham win the nomination over what you might define as a far left kind of squad type liberal. And now Cal Cunningham is, I know you're in California. I think one of the affairs are with a lady in California. He's got 2 others that have come out just in the course of the last week. And it's not just the rumors of affairs. It's text messages, it's pictures, it's him making arrangements while his family's out of town to have women over to his house. And so I think that race has really become it's changed around, like I said, just in the course of the last week. So those are 2 races that I think a lot of people thought Republicans were going to have challenges with. And now I don't see them as being the challenges anymore. I think both of them Republicans will be okay. I'll go from there to Maine. I think Susan Collins in Maine is an interesting situation. I mean, Maine is, by all stretch, more of a Democrat-leaning state. She has been down in most of the public polling. But I'll say this about Susan Collins. Again, she knows that state. She's the one person who, if anybody else were the Republican nominee there, I'd say, in 2020, it's probably not a good year. But I would predict that Susan Collins is able to hold on just because she has had that seat for so long. She has represented the state for so long. She probably knows just about every voter in the state by first name and has had them over to her house. So it's just that's kind of a tough place to be. It's sort of like, Republicans were not able to pick up seats, Democrat-held seats in Republican states like Montana and West Virginia last year because they ran against candidates who really knew their state. And that's kind of what you have on the flip side with Susan Collins up in Maine. From there, we could talk about a lot of different states. I think Iowa, where Joni Ernst was down in a lot of polls for a while, incumbent Republican Joni Ernst, but she had a tremendous debate performance last weekend. And I think you're seeing that race turn around a lot. But that's another one of those where we'll see what happens over the course of the next month. I think Donald Trump will be in good shape in Iowa, and that probably helps her out a lot. And I'll mention one last one in Arizona, Martha McSally, a true American hero. She was the first woman combat pilot. She is the one who broke the barrier for women to go into Islamic countries and not have to wear headgarb on American bases. She's in a tough battle with former astronaut Gabby Gifford's husband. And I think that one will come down to the wire. I think that race is one of those ones where you really hate to be involved in it because there's not as much as you can do except for kind of ride the top of the ticket. And what happens between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in Arizona probably has as much to do with what happens in that Senate race as just about anything else. But I think McSally has done just about everything right to put herself in a position to win. And but it's going to be one where it's all a matter of what happens at the top of the ticket.
I want to get back to that. That's wonderful. I want to get back to that point about top of the ticket in a second. But let me ask you about Lindsey Graham. What's going on in the South Carolina seat?
It's another one of those races where you've got so much money coming in. It's Graham's opponent he capitalized on Graham's leadership in the Kavanaugh hearings, and I bet Graham spends last cycle in 2018. I do a lot of work for Ted Cruz, and I've been involved with him since his very first election, and Ted Cruz raised the second most amount of money that had ever been raised and spent in the United States Senate race, and still got outspent 3-1 by Beto O'Rourke, who raised the most amount of money ever spent in the United States Senate race. $90 million that Beto O'Rourke was able to raise and spend in Texas. And that's kind of what is happening with Lindsey Graham right now. He's probably going to be outspent by a pretty significant amount, which is just shocking that you're seeing that from an incumbent senator, that they're going to be outspent by a challenger who's never run for this office before. And so I think ultimately, look, South Carolina, President Trump's probably going to win it by 20 points, if not more. And so I think carries Graham across the finish line. But it's one of those situations where I got to tell you, I was biting my fingernails toward the end of the election there in Texas, even though we should have been okay in a state like Texas. But it's tough to get outspent by 3 or 4-1 and still win. And I think that's what Graham's going to have to do. I think he will do it. But I couldn't even tell you what Graham won by last time because it was such a big distance, and it could be 3 to 5.
So what's the deal with Texas? Why was that election so close? Was it just the money, or was there something else going on?
It was more than just the money. I think a few things happened there that look, campaigns matter. And I will give the O'Rourke campaign credit in the fact that they hired 900 field reps that were able to knock on doors and help turn people out. And that's the second highest number of field reps ever hired in a campaign in United States history, number one being Obama 2012. So if you think about that for a second, you take a national number like what Obama was able to do, which was significant, and then you concentrate all that down along the I-35 corridor, which runs from Dallas to Austin. And they were able to turn 10 state house races there. And I think you'll see most of those turn back and go Republican in 2020. But that field organization, I really give their campaign a lot of credit. And it's just something that it's difficult to do in a state like Texas, where you have 254 counties, 20 medium, 16.5 million registered voters. I mean, it's a big number.
But that sounds not relevant to this race, though, because there's all this like lusting over this fantasy of Texas turning blue. Not happening this time?
No, it's not. I mean, Hager hasn't been able to raise anywhere near close to what O'Rourke raised. I think you're going to see John Cornyn be fine and probably win that race by, if not double digits, high single digits. And
then Trump would do the same. Yeah. So right now the Republicans are up 3. They're up 3 at 53 to 47. Are they going to? We talked about some races they could lose, right? Arizona, et cetera. Are there any races they could win? Could they pick up any seats or no?
Yeah, there's one that's just, I don't think anybody talks about it because it's such a done deal, and that's Alabama. I mean, Doug Jones famously beat 2 years ago, and that was never, it's kind of like, I would define it as they rented a seat for a couple of years. And if Doug Jones even wanted to hold the seat, he would have voted against impeachment. He would have voted for Kavanaugh, and he did neither one of those. I think he started kind of looking for his next job the next day. So Tommy Tuberville, former coach of the Auburn Tigers, will be the next senator from Alabama.
Oh, that's for sure. Okay, well, that's good for Republicans to have a little bit of cushion there, right? So even if you lose the Arizona seat, that at least gets balanced out by Alabama, and then we can see what else happens. Right. It'd have to be a pretty big blue wave, then, it sounds like, in order for Republicans to lose the Senate. Is that kind of what I'm getting from you?
I think that's right. It would have to be. But having said that, some of the polls coming out right now have Biden up 10, 12, 13 points. If that maintains itself, then all those predictions I made go out the window. And, you probably see Republicans lose Maine, probably Colorado, probably Arizona. But I think
that would do it.
4 years ago, we were talking about Access Hollywood. So things can change a lot between today and election day.
What would you say, and you've touched on this, but what would you say is the influence on a local race with the top of the ticket, Trump, versus like the local issues that I don't know about because I'm in California, but if you're in North Carolina, holy cow, do you know about it? What's the biggest factor there?
That is a great question. I was actually talking to a client of mine in South Carolina this morning about this because I was trying to find out, what the impact was from the Graham-Cunningham race on their race. And I think what you look at is you never want to have to run above the top of the ticket. If you have to exceed that top of the ticket, it's problematic. And in fact, it is. There have been a lot of political science studies that show how if the top of the ticket is 3 points below you, you've actually got to do 6 points better from a standpoint of trying to regain those numbers, because there's also a drop-off vote. So I think if you've got a state where Maine, Susan Collins is going to have to exceed the top of the ticket. Donald Trump is most likely not going to win Maine. And so from that, it does make it a more challenging campaign, and you've got to get out there and work even harder. But like I said, that's why whenever I first went through those races, I talked about the energy and the knowledge of the state that you have with a Gardner in Colorado or Collins in Maine, where I do think those things will be able to be overcome.
Okay. Chris, 30 seconds. Influence of Florida, local Florida elections on the presidential race there.
Florida is always a toss-up from a standpoint of what's going to happen. I mean, look back at from 2000. It's like, when have we seen things be normal in Florida? But the difference, I think the challenge right now that Democrats have in Florida is they just keep doing things to anger the Cuban base. And I could go through 4 or 5 things that have happened this year where they keep doing it. They kind of build a little bit back and they just screw it all up. And so I think from that standpoint, I mean, think about this: the mayor of Miami is a Republican, and from that, I think Rubio won big in 16. You look at Republicans picked up a Senate seat in the governor's mansion in 18. Florida, even though there are some trends that
just
taxes.
We just started to lose you. Darn it, but that's okay, because we got to go. And I'd add in there not only the mayor of Miami, that's interesting, I didn't know that, but the governor of Puerto Rico is a Republican that just endorsed Trump the other day as well. Chris Wilson, awesome to talk to you. Let's definitely do it again as we get a little bit closer. It's Wilson WPA on the Twitter, Wilson WPA. Thanks, Chris, appreciate you. More coming up, down ballot drama. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special Trump v. Biden down ballot drama. So we just talked about whether or not the Democrats can take back the Senate. Now let's talk about what happens if they do. Michael Anton is here. He's a lecturer at Hillsdale College. You can read his writings at the American Mind and the Claremont Institute. Mr. Anton, how are you, sir?
Fine, thanks.
Let's talk the filibuster. I hear this thrown around a lot. I don't really know what it is. And this is one of my theories, that I don't think most people in the media even really know what it is, but they don't want to take the time to explain it and expose the fact that they don't really. So I will admit, I don't really know what it is. So can you get wonky and describe what the filibuster is?
It's really 2 things. So in the popular imagination, if anybody remembers the great Frank Capra movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington from the 30s. Jimmy Stewart becomes a senator, just naive, well-meaning guy, goes to the swamp and realizes everything is corrupt. And he gives they say the word filibuster. Now, in that movie, the filibuster means once you start giving a speech and you have the floor, you don't have to give back the Senate floor as long as you can keep your speech going. But it does require your physical presence for as long as you can stand there, right? So you can't say, well, I need to go to the bathroom or I need to drink a water. You got to keep talking and holding the floor.
And
that's the original.
Yeah, I remember some examples of that too, where like they would bring in cots on the Senate floor, and like didn't like Rand Paul do like a 24-hour marathon speech or something?
Yeah. So the second meaning, which is what they're talking about now, is a rule. So it's not in the Constitution. This is one of the rules of the Senate, which can be changed by the Senate, which says that to stop debate on a vote. So let's say we're debating a nomination for a government position or a piece of legislation. To say, okay, everybody gets their say. To stop debate, you need 60 votes to say, okay, we're stopping debate and we're going to go to a floor vote. So the 60 votes doesn't confirm that person to their job or pass the legislation, but it's necessary to stop debate and go to the yes or no floor vote. So in effect, what the filibuster does is it requires 60 votes to get to yes on anything. Because as long as you can keep the quote unquote debate going, you can't have a floor vote. So if you can't get 60 to say, let's vote, effectively, you can't vote yes or no. Even if you have 51 votes for a yes on something, you need 60 just to hold that yes or no vote, right? So if they now, so that's a rule in the Senate. It's called cloture, right? Cloture means we're ending debate and we're moving on to the floor vote. By tradition, this is, well, okay, it's just a written rule in the Senate rules, which the Senate itself can change at any time. And for instance, they did get rid of it for Supreme Court nominees a few years ago. The idea being that, well, the majority party, whoever it is, should be able to vote, yes or no, up or down on the floor for a Supreme Court nominee. But it's still in place for other pieces of legislation and for judges below the level of the Supreme Court. So what the Democrats are threatening to do is they say, well, if we retake the Senate, we're going to get rid of the filibuster, and with a simple majority of senators, we're just going to pass whatever legislation we want. The idea is that, the Constitution does include certain provisions for supermajorities. In other words, legislation can pass with 50+1, but you can't remove the president from office or any official from office. You need 2/3. There are specific constitutional provisions where you need a supermajority to do things. What supermajorities do is, of course, requires politicians to build a wide consensus rather than just pass things on a straight party line. Even without the filibuster, there used to be an understanding in Washington that if you were going to do big things, you needed a supermajority behind it. So, for instance, when Lyndon Johnson passed the Great Society, perhaps the biggest raft of domestic legislation in the 20th century or since the New Deal, he got supermajorities. He got a lot of Republicans to sign on with him. He got much more than 50%. I think one of the reasons our politics have become so acrimonious is we don't do that anymore. So, for instance, when Barack Obama passed Obamacare in 2010, he got no as I recall, he got no Republican votes. It was a straight party line. And what happens is the other side tends not to admit the legitimacy of what you're trying to do when you do that. So, when we, in the old American tradition, doing big things means you wanted to get supermajorities, you wanted to get big bipartisan majorities to vote yes on things so that the whole country would feel that this is legitimate and they have a stake in it. And the filibuster was one way of protecting that.
You're right. So if you don't get that some sort of bipartisan support, you're almost setting it up for failure down the road, right? You're setting like a little ticking time bomb inside of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it's more that you're saying to half the country, we didn't listen to you on this. We don't care that you don't like it. We're just doing this by brute force. And so Obamacare has never been particularly popular for that reason, in a way that I think the Great Society, most of its programs have proved to be failures, expensive failures, and haven't worked. But they're not nearly as controversial with the American people, who feel like, this was voted on. 2/3 of the people accepted this at the time. The same way Social Security, it's got a lot of problems. It's the funding problems and so on. But it's broadly popular, in part because it's been around a long time and a lot of people benefit from it, but also in part that it was passed by supermajorities when originally in the 1930s.
Yeah, that's right. That's a wonderful point. Okay, so I want to get the players involved, right? So it's for a long time it's been you need 60 votes in order to end debate and go on to the vote. Who got rid of that? What is it now?
Well, it's still there. It was discarded for Supreme Court nominations. Now, remember, look, it wasn't that long ago when, as early as or as recently as the 1980s, Supreme Court justices were confirmed and other judges were confirmed overwhelmingly. The Bork nomination in 1987 is the first really controversial Supreme Court nomination over ideology in American history, as far as I know. There have been other controversial nominations because of people's backgrounds and their business dealings and character issues and things like that. But even so Bork was defeated in 1987. Even after that, though, many nominations, especially Democratic nominations, tended to get through without much acrimony. The Clarence Thomas nomination obviously was another hugely acrimonious nomination, but Clinton's nominees went through fairly easily, and as did George W. Bush's, with the exception of Harriet Miers, whom we had to withdraw. But once we get to Kavanaugh and now Barrett, we got to this point where Supreme Court nominations have become seen as these existential cage match fights for both parties, but especially for the Democrats. I note that Republicans tend to vote for Democratic nominees to the Supreme Court. Democrats never seem to vote for Republican nominees to the Supreme Court anymore. So the idea was, well, if you have the filibuster applies to Supreme Court nominations, then essentially you need 60 votes in the Senate for any president to exercise his constitutional authority. And that Senate rule then effectively overrides the Constitution. And so the Senate got rid of it for Supreme Court nominations. But it is still in place for other legislation, and they're threatening to get rid of it if they retake the Senate this fall.
Why don't Republicans want to get rid of it? Because I always think it's like a Democrat threat. Why wouldn't a Republican want to get rid of it?
It's one of these things that, you want to not have it when you control the Senate, but you want it to be there when you don't control the Senate, right? And the problem is there's no way to apply that standard unevenly. Once it's gone, it's gone. It can only be reenacted by a full vote of the Senate. So if the Democrats get rid of it, the Republicans will say, okay, now that it's gone, why should we allow you to have 2 years, 4 years, however long you control the Senate, with no filibuster, enacting whatever you want. And then when we come back in, we self-handicap ourselves by reviving the filibuster and applying it to us so that we can. They're going to say, well, if you guys got rid of it and enacted your agenda for however long, then when we come back in, we're not going to have it either. We're going to enact our agenda. Yeah. This is why it was
it would never come back.
On the Senate floor, the terminology in the Senate was always called the nuclear option. That's the way senators themselves described it. They called it the nuclear option because they know it's essentially mutually assured destruction. Once it's gone, it's never coming back, and neither side is ever going to use it again.
Whoa. Yeah, wow. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Michael, thank you for doing that. That was like I totally firmly grasped it. That was perfect. Do you think the Democrats would get rid of it if they won?
Well, I take them seriously when they say they're going to do something, and I assume that they're telling the truth and they're going to do it. So they say they're going to get rid of it. They say they're going to add 2 states, D.C. and Puerto Rico, guaranteed 4 Democratic senators to tip the balance of the Senate. They say they're going to do a lot of stuff. I think you have to take them seriously. They say they're going to amnesty every illegal alien in the country and add them to the voter rolls. I think you have to take that seriously. So, yes. Let me put it this way: if they don't do it, it won't be because they changed their minds or had a fit of moderation and decided, well, this is a bad idea. It'll be because they got stopped somehow. They take a poll and they realize public opinion is overwhelmingly against them. So, for instance, FDR tried to pack the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court kept ruling against his New Deal programs. And public polling at the time showed the U.S. public opinion overwhelmingly opposed, and he backed down. Now, in a sense, he got what he wanted out of that because the Supreme Court started to rule his way, even though he didn't pack the court. But they took the threat seriously and started giving him favorable rulings. Some of my friends say that was the plan all along. He never actually intended to add Supreme Court justices. He just wanted to change the behavior of the court, and the plan worked. I don't know. But let me just say that in terms of the current Democrats, I think the only thing that will stop them is if they think that their own political interests will be harmed. They're not going to be stopped by some idea that, well, we're really going too far this time, and this is immoderate, and this is the wrong thing to do, and let's not. Yeah. No, that's not.
Yeah, definitely. Read an article the other day, I think it was Politico, about how it was. I think the story was Obama gave some speech. I think it was at that comedy thing, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, or whatever.
Yeah.
And he made some joke about how, people say I should reach more across the aisle and have a drink with Mitch McConnell. Would you have a drink with Mitch McConnell? And the article was about how Joe Biden didn't think that was funny because Joe Biden is more of the old school style where you should kind of appeal to other people. And I guess he had this rule where you should have 2 conversations with a senator before you ask them for something. And his aides were like, can you hurry up and have those 2 conversations before, because we want to ask him quickly. So do you think that's true that Biden is more of this old school Senate style versus where we're headed now? Or do you think that's a pretty clear distinction about what the Senate is versus what it was?
I mean, I think Biden probably was that at some point. He doesn't seem to be that anymore. I mean, does anybody think that Joe Biden, who was elected in 1972, would have embraced the radical left agenda the way the Joe Biden of 2020 has? But he knows one thing he is a politician, so he knows where the base of his party is. He knows where that sentiment is, and that sentiment is radical. And he has to appeal to it if he's going to win their votes and hold their support over the long term. Look, Joe Biden, I think, did a terrible job presiding over the Clarence Thomas nomination in 1991. And yet, that was a Democratic-controlled Senate that went on to confirm Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, despite everything. It's impossible now to imagine a Democratic Senate ever confirming a Republican nominee to the Supreme Court again. Effectively, if we ever get to a point where we have a Republican president and a Democratic-controlled Senate, I think that Republican president will simply not be able to get a nominee to the court confirmed. The opposite is not true. Republicans tend to vote not overwhelmingly, but in strong numbers. So, for instance, with Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, a good third or so of the Republican caucus voted for both of them. So they got, I forgot what the vote tally was. I got to look it up right now, but It wasn't a bare majority. It was 60 or 70 votes. But the Democrats, there's no way they'll ever confirm a Republican court nominee again if they control the Senate.
We got like 20-something days left. How do you think the president needs to, and the Republicans running across the country, need to reframe everything so that they can win? What would be your advice?
I would stick to Trump's three great themes: trade, war, and immigration, and then add two on top, which have been made imperative by the events of 2020. One is rioting, and the other is the lockdowns. I think COVID is pretty clearly not as dangerous as everybody was led to believe or led to fear in February and March, when we were told it was going to kill 2 million or more Americans. It's dangerous, yes, right? But the fear is overblown. The lockdowns, I think, are overblown and probably more harmful than helpful. That we've hurt our economy, and we've just sort of stopped life. Schools aren't open, kids can't do things. All kinds of things. Just unreasonable and overly restrictive. And Joe Biden has said not only will he continue it, he'll make it nationwide if he's the president. And he can sort of weakly condemn violence, but he can't say who's doing it or why they're doing it. And in fact, the press and Biden supporters try to lie to us and say, oh, it's right-wing white nationalist extremists that are out there doing this.
The Proud Boys.
I think that's a complete and utter lie, just total shameless propaganda. I would run on those things.
Yeah, I think that's right. We'll see if we can at least pivot to those first three a little bit, because I haven't heard any of that in the last couple of months, and that's the media's doing more than anything. Michael Anton, lecturer at Hillsdale in Washington, D.C. Read him at the American Mind and the Claremont Institute. Michael, always good to talk to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Trump versus Biden, down ballot drama. We'll come up next, talk about with a former congressman about how local candidates need to run their races in light of the presidential ticket. Do that coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special Trump v. Biden down ballot drama. I want to go to former Congressman Dave Bratt. He's the Dean of the Business School at Liberty University. Mr. Bratt, how are you, sir?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me on.
I'm always curious the influence that the top of the ticket has on congressional and then all the way down ballot races. So what is your insight as a former congressman on the role of the president in local races?
Yeah, well, it's helpful, and that's what it's going to come down to. Without the president, he has a unique megaphone and power to use the bully pulpit. So how he frames this last month with the COVID virus from China, it's court is going to matter. That's going to be the big deal. If you're a Republican hanging out in the wind and the mainstream media and your local and regional state papers come out against you and shape everything toward the Democrat opponent, which they're doing and which is new, you're in trouble. But with the president's ability to crack through other social media devices, et cetera, it gives you a chance. And so it's a big deal.
What's the thing that's new, you said?
I've never seen the mainstream media in total alignment, right? And I mean, you can also see this with the deep state kind of stuff, which used to be kind of verboten. And now the latest news cracks on the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, et cetera, and the whole Russiagate thing that started to try to take out a sitting president. And pushed by the mainstream media, now the evidence came in just a few days ago. It's a total sham and a total fraud, and the American people are going to learn that in the closing weeks, so that'll be interesting.
How do you increase turnout?
Yeah.
And then in this election, who does that even benefit? I mean, how do we even look at that?
Well, that's a biggie, and the Dems are now nervous. This has shifted in the last month. The Republicans have a huge door-knocking, shoe leather advantage. The Democrats have, the COVID piece has been handled differently by them. Biden versus Trump, the contrast is clear there. But the Democrats were counting on, and in Michigan and in Pennsylvania, they've got Supreme Court decisions saying the election doesn't end 2 weeks past November 3, right? And so they're going for this. They think Trump may win on November 3. And then they've arranged with Twitter and Facebook, etc., do not announce. CNN, they've all stated this in public. Do not announce a victor November 3. And so that's what we're fighting against. But now the Democrats, because of the Supreme Court outcome, likely outcome in a couple weeks, now they have really shifted their focus because now they're in trouble. They're not doing the shoe leather, and all their well-laid plans for this 2-week, vote harvesting thing, a lot of that's going to go to the Supreme Court. And so Axios, kind of the Democrat mouthpiece, a couple of weeks back said, hey, we reverse plans, shoe leather, get out there, knock doors. So it's a crazy story right now, what's unfolding.
How much of congressional races and Senate races and down ballot, how much of it is at the whims of just anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like the whims of just whatever random thing happens, or is that just us kind of going back and explaining things? Is it already baked in the cake, or is still everything up in the air?
No, I think there's still a lot up in the air. A lot of things can break in the closing weeks. But overall, a lot of it is cultural right now, right? The left in Richmond City, if you're a business or a household, you don't have the right sign in your front window, your house gets annihilated. So a lot of people are living under fear. The question is, and that's shaping the culture, the corporations you see are folding and paying hush money to be protected from the violence in the streets, et cetera. The question is, has the culture had enough of this nonsense, and are they going to vote in private and show how they really feel? And I think that's a big underlying variable no one knows the answer to. We'll see November 3.
I don't know how much you're keeping in touch with your former congressmen who are still there, but how are they running? And every area is different, right? But how are they running their campaigns? What are the big issues on a local level?
Yeah, well, they, the economy obviously is always issue number one. And then, I don't think the Republicans have done a good job framing the COVID virus. It's a tragedy. It's got to be taken seriously. But it came from the Wuhan district. And now this Dr. Yan from the virology lab, PhD in China, in the lab itself, is testifying this thing was created in the lab and was spread intentionally by China. Well, if you've got intent and causality and they let 400,000 flights go out, I cannot believe the Republicans are not doing more with that, because the Democrats are openly laying 200,000 deaths at the president's feet in the news. That's shocking. And for the Republicans not to counter with evidence, which is out there now, and this is the CCP virus. Nothing against the Chinese people. We want to save them. They're living under a totalitarian regime, 1.4 billion people created in the image of God. But they're living under a CCP nightmare. And where are the liberals and the human rights folks, et cetera, on any of this? They're all AWOL.
I was called a racist yesterday for mentioning that the virus came from China.
Crazy.
Right? So what the president, you can imagine, right? And so are Republicans scared of, how scared are Republicans of being called bigots for anything? Not just that, but for anything ever.
Yeah, very. I went to Princeton Seminary, got a PhD in economics, taught at a small liberal arts school, taught ethics for 20 years. And my regional paper, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and all of them just laid it out. They call you every name in the book, especially in closing. I had 20 plagiarism cases against me. I had the head of Harvard come in and defend me. None of it mattered, right? Once they paste you in the press, that's what I was saying to open it. Trump is the only one that's got a megaphone big enough to crack through that. So that's going to be crucial, how he lays out this final month of argument.
Do you have any predictions? Not for the presidential race necessarily, although please. But even how this makeup of the Senate ends up, because that's huge, right? I mean, obviously, if the Democrats held the Senate in 2018, or if they took the Senate in 2018, we wouldn't be having an Amy Coney Barrett. So the Senate's huge. I don't think it's getting enough attention, hence this special here. So what do you think is going to happen with the Senate?
Yeah, no, this Supreme Court thing really does throw the moderates into a pickle. It really does heighten the anxiety in some of those races because of the cultural issues and the way they're going to have to moderate their language and messaging on this, or they'll get assaulted by the press. And so the only silver lining is that presidential turnout piece that comes in to support them and gives them a little bit of coattails. And then if we can turn the media narrative more toward the truth on the China piece, on the COVID piece, on the economy piece, 3 days before the election, you're going to have a 20% plus GDP growth story coming out, the numbers, right? If you start low, it's easy to double things, right? It's easy, the percentage goes up. So there's a little bit of that going on, but it's for real. We are recovering. The number will be, over 20% GDP growth rate. And in the last few days, boy, that's a staggeringly good news for the president to utilize.
When does that come out?
3 days before the election, right at the end of the third quarter numbers. That'll come out a few days right before November 3.
Crazy. All right, we got to run here. Last question for you. You mentioned this in passing. What do we do? What does a conservative do with the integrity of the election afterwards, right? Because if you make the claim, as Trump did during the debate, hey, here's these ballots that were missing, here's these ballots, blah, blah. If you make a claim of any irregularities, then you're going to be called a conspiracy theorist and you're still in the election and it's a coup and blah, 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 blah. How should a Republican position themselves on this?
Well, I think you get the news clips up right now. James, I'm going to blank on the last name, but, he had to report out, 300, guy in a car with 300 ballots they gathered from senior homes. It's evident. It's not theoretical anymore. And you got the Minnesota district with Omar there. The evidence is in. And so that's what's going on. And the best thing you can do is insulate yourself, inoculate yourself from the damage that the left will give you by putting the evidence out there ahead of time to show, hey, this is already a done deal.
Yep, we're going to do more of that too. All right, Dave Bratt, always good to talk to you. Dean of the School of Business at Liberty. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thank you guys very much. Awesome.
Former Congressman, of course. Trump versus Biden, down ballot drama indeed. Mike Slater, spread the word.